Thursday talk for mental health. And welcome everyone, and we have participants coming in. So let's get started for tonight. Just give me a second to share my slides. Okay, just a quick overview of my slides. Okay, so this is a joint webinar together with our national coalition. Now, today there are total of 4 webinars going on at this moment. So I kind of feel a bit Zoom fatigue at this moment, right? Because 4 is running. Lucky I'm organizing this, right? And also glad that today our guest, the speaker, will talk about what is Zoom fatigue and how to overcome it. So thank you everyone from coming into this webinar, and I'm glad that you came in because you're going to find out something how to overcome your mental health. All right. So stay tuned and don't go to other webinar. Just stay tuned here. Okay. So just a quick overview is what is National Coalition. National Coalition is a group of partners come together and look into how can we create awareness and support to the mental health in this society. So today I'm going to update a little bit. So I'm playing a few roles. I'm the facilitator for tonight, right? And also I will be sharing the latest update of National Coalition, right? So today, now what have we been done for the last 1 month? And remember, every third Thursday will be the third Thursday talk together with our speaker, and that is one of the initiatives we've been carrying out for the last 6 months, and it's going to carry on for the next 1 whole year, right? So one of the exciting things that coalition partners have come out is social media. Right? So they have created the video that you just watched, and at the same time, it will be published twice a week into our social media. So if you are not in our Facebook or in our Instagram, please add yourself into it, so you can get updates on what's going to happen in National Coalition. At the same time, you're going to find out more what are the awareness resolution you can get support related to mental health. So with that, right, let me just get in. I would like to introduce our young and lovely moderator in. Now she gave me a long CV profile, and I'm not going to read out her profile, it's too long. I don't get you bored. So what I did is, in general, knowing her for the last couple of months, she is a very passionate mental health advocate. Right? She participated in our webinar. Right? She organized it. At the same time, she also involved in other task force, which is in communication. She have written a few nice stories about mental health and published it out. At the same time, she also helped out a task force called Mental Health in the Workplace. Right? She's very active in this mental health initiative. And tonight, let's welcome our young and lovely moderator, Shavina Devi.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon, for the very warm welcome. So hello, everyone. Good evening. It's great to see you all here today. I'm very, very thankful to be given this opportunity to moderate this session on what is becoming a very concerning topic. And, you know, it's officially been a little over a year now since the very first MCO. And throughout the roller coaster of emotions, ups and downs, we're all still here. So we should be cheering because we're just trying our best to make it through these challenging times. And over the past year, we've seen an uprise in the awareness centering around the negative impact of COVID. So there was a proliferation of topics, you know, surrounding suicide, depression, social isolation, and burnout. And interestingly, another topic that has been gaining quite a bit of traction lately is the strain of work from home practices due to, you know, COVID. And I'm going to go right ahead and address the elephant in the room here. with the recent surges in cases, both yesterday and today, which is very alarming, that's over like 6,000 cases, there is a possibility of a full lockdown to be conducted in Selangor. So it looks like work from home is here to stay and is probably going to be part of, the new normal. But then again, with the constant revisals of SOPs and guidelines, and when pandemic fatigue is already heavily setting in, what is even normal at this point? So, and there's also restrictions on travel and social life that has left us feeling very isolated and despondent. So I just wanted to check in with all of you regarding how you've found work from home so far. So I'm going to paste a link into the chat box. So basically what that does is it takes you to the Mentimeter voting poll where you get to share with me your thoughts on what you think of working from home so far. So I'm just going to paste it in the chat box now. Okay, so you can click on it and it will take you to the voting site, and then I'll be able to present my screen and we can see all of your responses. So I'm going to share my screen. Give me a minute. Right. Some responses are coming in. Some are saying it's bad, some are saying it's superb, crazy, depressed, terbaik, awesome, restrictive, superb, hate, challenging. Definitely, it's been very challenging. Adventurous, oh, that's an interesting response. Hectic, yes, very, very hectic. Agree with you on that. Exhausting, definitely, like what Dr. Dixon was mentioning earlier, due to Zoom fatigue. Save, someone mentioned the word save. United, satisfactory. So there seems to be a mix of responses here. Some of the audience seems to think that it's been going well. Working from home has benefited them, and it looks like the other end of the audience is feeling, a little bit exhausted. Yeah, no social interaction, definitely inefficient from all the meetings that we have back to back, right? So we'll keep the responses coming in for the next 30 seconds, and then we'll move on with the session. So very interesting. There's another one that says acceptable. Oh, so it's sort of in the middle then. Flexibility, definitely. We don't have to commute to work anymore, so that gives us a lot more time in the morning to sleep in, I suppose. There is frustrating, definitely. Could be because of technical difficulties, if you don't have a stable Wi-Fi connection, if you're at home with your bunch of family members and they're all very noisy, you can't really have your meetings. So sad. Healthcare, oh, that's okay. That's stressful. Yes, very stressful. A new experience, manageable, languishing, fun. Right, so it's really nice to see all the responses. Thank you so much for responding, but I don't want to take up too much time in the session. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. All right, Dr. Dixon, can you please present the next slide? All right, thank you. So, from all your responses, it seems that there is a mixture of both. But it does seem to lean a little bit more towards the negative side, right? Where we're all feeling a bit challenged, frustrated, and stressed, which is why we thought that it would be important to bring in an expert on matters surrounding both the physical and mental health aspects of employees in organizations. Therefore, we are extremely honored to have Mr. Azran with us here today. And I don't believe he needs much of an introduction, as he is a very well-renowned figure, having served as the CEO of AirAsia X, and he is the current CEO and co-founder of Naluri, a pioneer in next-generation digital therapeutics for chronic disease management, mental health support, and digital health coaching. Moreover, he has also held previous positions at Astro All Asia Networks, McKinsey, And very, very notably, he is a Stanford alumnus. And outside of work, he's an adventure traveler and an Ironman triathlete. Wow, that's very interesting. We've got to have him tell us more on that. So without further ado, let's bring Azran in.
Thank you very much, Shavina. Good evening, everyone. It is a real honor to be invited today, especially May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be able to share with you some of my thoughts on mental health, and we'll also touch on the work from home scenario. Dixon, if it's okay, if you can allow me to share my slides. But while you do that, I wanted to first of all premise by saying that, mental health is a very deep and broad field. I will only be scratching the surface given the site. But I wanted to leave with you a couple of perspectives on how we look at mental health, and therefore, how does it impact the way that we work, especially in a remote context. Now, the starting point for mental health, if I may, let me know, can you see my screen? Perfect.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Is this idea that actually, mental health starts from a natural part of our body, which is our survival instinct, right? We are wired, our brain is wired to always be on the lookout for potential threats or dangers. And if we see any incoming threat, right? For example, if you were this antelope and suddenly a lion pounces and starts to sprint after you, stress hormones kick in, which makes your heart beat faster, your lungs to expand, and your muscles prime to run away from that lion, or maybe in some cases to fight the lion. Right? Now, interestingly, even if you are the lion, right, you too need to experience a surge of stress hormones that make your heart beat faster, your lungs to expand, and your muscles prime, because you've got to catch your prey. Because if you don't eat for several days, you'll probably starve to death. So whether you're the predator or the prey, you need stress in order to get by. Now, there's, at some point, there's a right amount of stress for us to perform at our peak, where the heart is beating faster, the lungs are expanding to get us to achieve what we need to do. But too much stress can have a very debilitating effect. Now, traditionally, our bodies were designed for short bursts of stress, because predators or enemies like a lion chasing you, if you can outsprint a lion for 30 seconds, they're likely to just give up, pant, okay, next time I try to catch after you, right? And so the antelope, for example, when it sees that the lion has given up, it can immediately go back to grazing and all the stress hormones dissipate away. But humans, however, have developed such that today, right, hopefully none of you have to face a lion chasing after you, but today, our threats that trigger the stress hormones could be from our boss being angry at us, right? Our clients being upset. We've got pressure from sales targets, or maybe our spouse is unhappy at us. All of this causes the body to react the same way as if a lion is chasing after you. But here's the thing. I haven't figured out, and if any of you have, please let me know in the chat. How do you make that boss or that client or your spouse to stop after 30 seconds? They don't. That stress keeps going on and on and on, to the point where we've evolved such that we've developed something where even if the boss has not yet got upset, the client is not yet angry, your spouse is not yet unhappy, but you anticipate that it might happen, and it causes the body to react, right? The heart starts to beat faster, your palms start getting clammy, your lungs keep expanding, your breathing gets heavier, your muscles get tense, right? You anticipate that it might happen, and the body's already reacting. That is what we call anxiety. So the difference between stress and anxiety is stress is the body's reaction when you're faced with that threat or that danger. But anxiety is the body's same reaction in anticipation of a future potential threat. Now, for some others, even after that threat or stress danger has passed, sometimes long ago in the past, like childhood trauma, we can't keep shaking off. There are videos playing in our head over and over again, replaying that, causing the body to have very similar stressful reactions. That is depression. So in a way, anxiety is these videos playing in our heads of anxious thoughts of the future, and depression is when the brain is playing these depressive thoughts of the past. Now, what happens when the body's not able to pause or take a break from these videos playing unrelentlessly in our heads? So to give you an illustration, Shavina mentioned that one of my pastimes outside of the COVID pandemic was Ironman triathlon racing. And that involves a 3.8 kilometer ocean swim, followed by a 180 kilometer bike ride, and then a 42 kilometer marathon run all in the same day. And that's why I guess I can know a thing or two about being mental. But in that one day of swimming, cycling, and running, I will burn 6,000 calories. That's the equivalent of eating 10 plates of nasi lemak. In one day, I will lose about 2 to 3 kilograms of weight from one day of Ironman triathlon racing. But here's an interesting factoid. A world champion chess grandmaster competing in a world championship tournament when the stakes are highest also burns 6,000 calories. That's right, guys. No need to exercise. Just play chess. And the chess grandmaster will actually even lose 2 to 3 kilograms of weight after a chess championship tournament. Now, it's not because of the calories coming from, moving those chess pieces around. But imagine what's going through his or her head, right? Thinking about 50 moves ahead, multiple scenarios. The brain is on overdrive because our brains are only about 2% of our body's weight, but it consumes over 20% of all the calories, all the energy consumption in our body. And so when the brain is on overdrive, you can imagine that it causes our body to be physically fatigued and tired. And that is why after a while of unrelenting stress and those videos playing in our head, we actually develop physical conditions like high blood pressure and diabetes, heart diseases, and even cancer. And that's why there's a very strong relationship between depression and anxiety and chronic conditions like diabetes and heart diseases. Now, to give you an understanding of the prevalence here within Malaysia, and it's very similar across most other regions in the world. So what I do at Nalari and my team, because we want to take a quantitative approach to address chronic conditions like mental health, we have to start by establishing a quantitative baseline of prevalence. So we've been working with a lot of corporate clients. We've had over 25,000 employees from these different clients who we help get them healthier, but it starts by understanding what's the starting point. And essentially what you see here is that about 40% of Malaysians, right, white collar working adults, are experiencing elevated levels of depression. 60% tend to have experienced elevated levels of anxiety, and 30% have elevated levels of stress at different degrees of severity, right? Some at an early, mild, moderate stage, but you can see that bottom 10, 12% in the red zone, that is where it becomes serious. That's where it becomes severe, and it starts to develop chronic conditions, right? Like major depression, right? Or generalized anxiety disorders, where your ability to function normally is already impaired. Now, during the COVID-19 pandemic specifically, not only do we do an initial assessment, but we also then continue to engage with the Nalari members through our chat application, where we have psychologists and dietitians and doctors coaching them throughout the time. We analyze the words and the phrases that they use in their text. And using natural language processing technology, we can come up with an estimate of their depressive sentiment. And it's very interesting to see strong correlations between how, for example, with the first MCO back in March 2020, we started to see a spike in our depression index, where it became about 40% higher than it was pre-COVID. It started to come down again as the restrictions were relaxed, and it started to come back again at the end of the year and the start of this year. So you can see how the COVID-19 pandemic has quantitatively affected levels of depression and anxiety amongst our Malaysian working population. Now, because we take a quantitative approach, right? We can also then look at the data in multiple angles. And I thought one that would be interesting to share with you this evening is that there is definitely a generational difference. And so if I were to cut our data and look at the population that is under 30 years old, so typically about 21 to 30 years old, and we were to compare that to people who are above 40, still working, but above 40. And what you can see here is that the younger millennials under 30 are experiencing between 40 to 79% higher levels of depression, anxiety, and stress compared to the above 40. Now, there's a very long conversation we can have about why this has occurred, right? Because of, a completely new generation, and there are multiple factors, including, for example, financial pressures, because in this generation, cost of living has gone up much higher than wage increases, to the effects on technology, and to the changes in social dynamics and family support systems. But moving on, I think as leaders, right, who want to take a proactive approach to understanding this, we also have to start by identifying the early signs and symptoms. Because if we can notice amongst our colleagues, family members, and friends who have these early signs and symptoms, we can start to engage and help them so that it doesn't deteriorate to a point where it gets into that red zone of criticality, where it becomes a chronic medical condition already. So sort of 6 broad categories to start with, right? Because as you recall, the effect of stress, anxiety, and depression, which causes our muscles to be tense, and unfortunately, the triggers of that stress don't go away like the lion after 30 seconds, but it keeps piling on and on and on. That causes a lot of fatigue and muscle soreness, especially in your neck and your lower back, right? So that is kind of one potential sign that we see. Second is irregular sleep, whether it is insomnia, lack of sleep, or even hypersomnia, too much sleep. If you're sleeping more than 9 hours a day for 4 to 5 days in a row, that can be a concern. Or sometimes you sleep, but then you keep waking up in the middle of the night and the quality of your sleep is being impaired, because sleep's main function is actually our brain's health. It is not physical recovery. It is the health of our brain, and I'm going to touch on that a bit later. Short-temperedness, irritability are also signs of someone experiencing mental distress, as is loss of appetite. So either suddenly you're not eating at all, or you're eating a lot more than normal, or you're starting to eat a lot more sugary or salty foods. And the reason why our appetite is impaired, right? Because again, the body basically assumes that stress trigger is like a lion chasing after you. And so what the body wants to do is to send all your available energy towards your muscles and your heart and your lungs. It kind of shuts down your immune system, your digestive system, and even your reproductive system, because it wants all the energy to be channeled towards that fight or flight situation. And because the hormones are kind of suppressing our digestive system, we're going to have some appetite issues. So that is another sign or symptom of someone that may be approaching burnout, stress, anxiety, and depression. And ultimately, as I said, it does lead to physical effects on our health. So sort of fever, dizziness are also common symptoms. And lastly, especially in the workplace, disengagement. So if a normal employee suddenly becomes very reclusive, start to shut off their video, they don't turn in their work as promised, they miss deadlines, that is a potential sign that they're experiencing elevated levels of depression and anxiety. Now, where's the starting point to all of this? And here's something that I wanted to share with you. So what science has shown is that on average for all of us, half of our waking hours, the brain is thinking of something else except for the task that's in front of us. That's right. Half of you listening to this webinar right now are not paying attention to what I say. You're checking your WhatsApp message, you're scanning your email or your Facebook news feed, or you're trying to do multiple things at once. Your mind is wandering 47% of our waking hours. Now, what's obviously then what does mind wandering lead to? And that is something that most of us are guilty of, which is simultaneous multitasking. We think we're being productive by having multiple devices, multiple windows open, multiple apps. We think we're being productive juggling multiple things at once. But that is not what is happening. The brain does not multitask. The brain does one thing at a time. And what happens is when you try to do multiple things, right? 7 seconds on this WhatsApp, 12 seconds, I listen back to Azran on this webinar. 8 seconds, I'm going to check my email. 9 seconds, I'm going to kind of pay attention to what my son or daughter has said. You're shifting from one task to the other. And every time you shift, it takes an additional cognitive load for the brain to reorient itself to the next focus. So the more you switch, the more the brain wanders, right? The more load that it's going to put on itself. Right? And the more we encourage our brain to hop, the more it's going to have a higher propensity to wander around. And guess where the brain goes when it has this habit of wandering around? It starts to look for anxious thoughts of the future, and it goes back to depressive thoughts of the past, because that's how we're wired. Our survival instinct is constantly scanning for danger, right? So the more we do not control, right, our focus and attention, the more we keep multitasking, the more we're actually encouraging our brain to keep going from one task to the other. So here's a little experiment just to illustrate this point further. Here are two sets of tasks. On the left-hand side are arithmetic or math tasks, right? Simple ones. And on the right-hand side is a creative task. So you see two icons, and your goal is to make a sentence, a complete sentence with two words represented by each icon. So imagine if we went from left to right, right? So if you start with 18 times 7, Dixon, you're a superstar. Tell me what's 18 times 7. Right? And if you got that answer, then come up with a sentence with a fish and a bicycle, right? If you got that one, Jude, can you come with me? 52 plus 19, what's the answer? Right? Shavina, apple and an eye, make a sentence, right? Go back to 46 minus 38, that I know, 8, right? Clock and a bird, 32 times 11, bridge and a cross. Now, here's the thing. This has been repeated many, many, many times over, and you're welcome to do this. If you went from left to right, left to right, left to right, you will take about 20% longer than someone who does all the math questions in a batch and all the creative questions in a batch. The simple act of switching requires additional load, requires a bit more time for you to reorient the brain. Right? So task switching is actually the foundation that ultimately creates the propensity for anxiety and depression. And the best way, I suppose, for me is think about driving, right? For those of you who drive, imagine if the way you drove was accelerate and brake, change direction, accelerate, brake, change direction every few seconds. What do you think will happen to your engine? What do you think is going to happen to your fuel efficiency of your car if that's the way you keep driving, right? Accelerate and brake, turn, 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 as opposed to cruise control, 15 minutes. I'm going to drive on this highway, and then I'm going to make a nice turn and drive accordingly, right? Significant effect on fuel efficiency and engine wear and tear. And that is exactly what we are putting our brains towards. So in another way, when you think about how we approach our daily tasks, now I get it. All of us have multiple responsibilities, especially Rotarians who are taking on many, many different projects. But one of the key ways of addressing this is to avoid simultaneous multitasking, but to process our work in batches. Something as simple as, if I'm going to do emails, I'm going to focus on my email browser for 15, 20 minutes, clear all my messages, and then I switch off my browser and move on to another task for about half an hour. Then I'm going to take another break, and then I'm going to do each task in about 15, 20, 25-minute chunks of time where I focus on one thing at a time. That can make a huge and massive difference. You know, another way from my triathlon experience, Shavina, if you can tell me, guess, right? What's the difference between running a standalone marathon like Standard Chartered Kuala Lumpur Marathon versus running the marathon portion of an Ironman triathlon race? Would you know? It's the same 42 kilometers, but what's one of the key differences?
I suppose the Ironman one has more challenges that you'd have to go through, or the obstacles.
No, not really. It's still a run. But basically, have you noticed a lot of these standalone marathons? They start at like 4 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning, right? Because it's not hot. So that you can complete most of the race. You're done by 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and you're spared from the brutality of the scorching heat of midday. But an Ironman race, before you can start your marathon, you have to first complete a 4 kilometer swim and then a 180 kilometer run. So by the time you start your marathon, it's probably going to be about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, right? And the sun is beating hard. And here's an interesting thing, if you notice Ironman triathletes, right? When they run, we look for small tree shades, right? So you kind of run because that 2 seconds of relief makes a massive difference, right? And that is why small incremental relief from the load can make a very significant difference, especially over a 42-kilometer distance. So what that means for remote work, for example, and one of the reasons why people are experiencing Zoom fatigue, right, is that somehow bosses today, managers, were not trained. How am I supposed to manage my remote teams? Right. And the immediate worry for the manager is, if I don't see you, if you're not in front of me in the office, surely you must be either lying on your couch watching Netflix or you're taking a nap, right? I don't trust you because I don't see you. So then I expect you, when I send you a WhatsApp message or an email, you need to reply to me immediately to show that you're on your computer. Like, guess what happens when that becomes the culture? Well, what happens is, whatever I do, I got to stop, pause, change direction, stop, pause, change direction, right? And that is what creates a lot of cognitive load. And you can see that manifest with the spikes in depression and anxiety as a result of this work from home environment. So one way of addressing that is to specifically minimize the time of people focusing on multiple things at once, and even minimizing the time for live interactions. In my case with my teams during peak COVID, what we did was we did morning check-ins, 9 to 9:15, and we did afternoon checkouts, 5:45 to 6. For the rest of the day, we use asynchronous team communications, i.e. a tool like Slack or Microsoft Teams, where you use chat, right? And bosses who want status updates, we don't use meetings for status updates. Update your status in cloud-based collaboration tools. And the few 15 minutes in the morning is just so that we agree on the priorities for the day. And at 5:45, 15 minutes, quick round of the table. Who got what done? Was there any issues that need to be carried over the next day? And if under exceptional circumstance, there is something urgent that needs to be carried on the night, as leaders, we monitor who needs to work beyond 6 o'clock. Sometimes the reality is we've got proposals, deadlines, crisis situations, and people do need to work late. But if I see my team members continuously working late 4 to 5 nights a week, they will burn out, right? And so I've got to manage the energy of my teams by making sure it only happens 1 to 2 nights a week. And generally, most people will be done by around 6 o'clock in the evening. And we have to do that explicitly, because if we don't, what most likely will happen is people carry on working way throughout the night, because there's no longer any boundaries between work and our personal lives. And therefore, as leaders, we actually need to make those things explicit. Now, one of the things I really try to encourage my teams with is, rather than wait until someone experiences depression and anxiety, is what can we do to help them train to build positive mental health and fitness, right? So that they can handle better the amounts of stress and pressure that inevitably comes with, kind of the economic slowdown and financial uncertainties of a global pandemic. So I just wanted to share with you some of the things that we focus on as a team, because we've got to now, as leaders, proactively manage the energy levels of our team members, and not just physical energy, but also mental and emotional energy, which works exactly the same. And the way you build mental fitness and resilience is the same way that you build physical strength. Right? For example, if you've never been to the gym and I just decide to bring you to a gym and we spend 2 hours lifting weights, I guarantee all you're going to get from that experience is just sore muscles, and you swear you'll never go to the gym again. So building physical strength and stamina requires the consistency, starting at a lower base, 5-10 minutes a day, but the regularity and consistency improves your physical strength. Same thing with mental health. So what's the equivalent of building mental health and fitness in the context, right? So one of the first things is, of course, learning how to be mindful and learning our focus muscles. Because if you now know why mind wandering is the starting point for depression and anxiety, small things like doing things one things at a time, whether it may be breathing techniques, or you even if you're sitting in your computer doing work, if I'm doing my Microsoft Word report, I'm going to focus only on my Microsoft Word report. Even tonight, having dinner with my family, I'm going to learn to be present and engage with my family over dinner and put that phone away and switch off that television. Learning to do one thing at a time is how we start to build our focus and concentration muscles and control that level of mind wandering. Now, even exercise is a very important part of stress management. But again, not all exercise is the same, right? Some CEOs in Kuala Lumpur, when I ask them how often do they exercise, and they tell me 3 hours a week, I said, wow, that's pretty good. What do you do? Oh, Saturday nights, I play futsal at Ampang for 3 hours, running around. And the rest of the 6 days, they don't do anything. Well, that's not great in terms of building our body's capacity to better handle stress and pressure. So a couple of things. One, again, is that consistency and regularity, but more importantly is to focus on the intensity of that physical activity. Not too intense that it causes the body to be in a physical distress state, but also not too light that you don't have any effect. And generally speaking, depending on age and your state of health, we can adjust for that. But for most people, it would be about keeping your heart rate to about 120 to 140. And today with Apple Watches and Garmins and Fitbits, it becomes very easy for people to monitor where they are at the right intensity. So it has nothing to do with whether you're walking or you're running or you're swimming or you're cycling, because for some people, walking can cause their heart rate to go well below 140, which basically means they're actually under stress or they're not fit. Or other people can be running a marathon and still keep that heart rate to under 140, but practicing in that zone, because in the zone is where the dentate gyrus in our brain. So the dentate gyrus is part of our hippocampus that controls like the thermostat of our brain. The dentate gyrus helps to regulate our moods and emotions, and it's going to be most stimulated at about 120 to 140 beats per minute over at least 150 minutes, spread out across 5 to 6 days a week. Now, I touched on sleep, but here's the thing, right? Physically today, right? Our body has a lymphatic system, right? Which kind of flushes out a lot of the toxins and, from our body. But the brain has something called a glymphatic system, where there are these glial cells in the brain that act like gardeners to prune away those anxious thoughts of the future or the depressive thoughts of the past, right? And so if you've got enough good night's sleep, your brain's gardeners, the glial cells, are going to be doing its job, and you're going to wake up in the morning with a clear level head. Now, interestingly, in this time of pandemic, something to keep in mind, right? A lot of science now has shown that if we don't get enough quality sleep, not just the number of hours, but the quality of the sleep, it can have a much, much bigger impact on your immune system and your body's ability to produce enough antibodies when you get the vaccine, compared to whether you get an AstraZeneca vaccine or a Pfizer vaccine or a Sinovac vaccine. And that's why sleep is so crucial. And we spend a lot of time helping employees actually set the right habits and structures so that they get good quality sleep. And last point to share with you this evening is that while I talked earlier about stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline and norepinephrine that get the heart beating faster, the lungs to expand, the muscles primed, but one last fact, the body is also sending out another hormone when we are under stress. And that hormone is oxytocin. Oxytocin is also known as the love hormone or the cuddle hormone. It surges through a mother with a newborn baby because that's how human bonds of connection are built. Why? Because for thousands of years, the way we survived as a species when we're confronted with dangers of predators or enemies attacking us, harsh winters, difficult droughts, the way we survived was that we bonded together as a tribe. If we faced it by ourselves, we're not likely to survive. So the body basically saying, under threat, under stress, send out oxytocin, connect and support and be together. Because if we can define the right support system, we're much more likely to be able to handle that stress and pressure. And that is why those under extreme levels of depression and anxiety, one of the first things you notice is they feel isolated. There is not enough oxytocin flowing. They don't have the support structures that they need to get through. And that is why our health really depends on our ability to perform our best depends on having the right support structure in place. So with that, I'm going to stop right there. Thank you very much for indulging me in sharing, my views on stress, anxiety, depression, and how do we also think about building a culture of positive mental health. With that, I'm going to turn it back to our moderator, Shavina.
Thank you so much, Azran, for that very comprehensive and insightful sharing. I think you've covered everything pretty much spot on. I think you did everything so well that basically the audience has no further questions or anything that they would like to probe you on further. But I think drawing on what you said, right now, it's very, very difficult for us to all switch off from work. Even yesterday, I found myself dealing with 20 open tabs. And when I was trying to finish those tasks, I was having a difficulty because I couldn't even trace back which tab exactly had the information that I wanted. Mm-hmm. So that was very insightful, where you mentioned that it's much more productive and efficient for us to focus on one set of a task at one time and then move on to the other. So you covered a few aspects that probably companies are doing, or some of the toxic work cultures that have contributed towards bad work from home practices. And, because of the nature of the work that you do and the interaction that you have with so many of these companies, is there probably any other factors or things that they're doing right now at the moment that have contributed further towards worsening our psychological well-being, in specifically regards to work from home practices?
Well, I think first of all, I'm actually very heartened that a lot of organizations now realize that this is a serious issue and they need to be proactive about it, right? But there remains big issues. Number one, we do have, for example, a gender issue, right? Especially with male leaders who kind of ignore it or basically say, just suck it up and tough it up. There is that sort of macho attitude. So that lack of willingness to address it, even though they kind of know about it, they don't want to admit it. The second thing is, as I alluded to earlier, we do have a generational difference, because if I'm an above 40 leader, right, I would probably, probabilistically speaking, don't have depression, anxiety, and stress. And so I look at my younger people and they keep asking for sick leave and they're not showing up for work. And I think, they're just snowflakes. So these are not helpful when you just kind of keep pounding pressure on them, right? So first is actually building that awareness to understand why these different factors exist, and therefore start to teach leaders and managers to be aware of the signs and symptoms that we talked about earlier, but also very importantly, how do I even start the conversation about it? Most people actually say, yeah, I know this is serious, but I don't even know where to start. Where do I begin? What's my role as a manager? And they don't know that. And that's probably a good conversation to have in terms of how can any one of us start to have that conversation if we did see one of our team members or even one of our family members experiencing one of those 6 signs and symptoms.
Mm-hmm. I think that's very important, mental health literacy. And I suppose one of the silver lining, I don't know if you can call it that because the pandemic is just really bad, right? But I suppose one good thing that probably came out of it is that there are more conversations around mental health now. People recognize and acknowledge the importance of it. And there's been a snowball of conversations around it compared to pre-COVID, where people would, I guess, look at you differently or judge you if you say that, I'm going through stress. They'd be like, what are you stressed about? Whereas now it's like, okay, please go and take care of your health and your well-being. So I also wanted to get your insights a little bit more on the blurring between work and home boundaries. Mm-hmm. So, with people now adapting to the work from home lifestyle, they've resorted to using their kitchen counters, dining tables, sofas, and even their beds as their workspaces.
Sure.
So there's a lack of clear distinction between the spaces there, whereas, previously we used to physically commute to work. And there was a very clear distinction. So work is where I actually do my work. And when I come back home, I relax. But now that both of these spaces have been enmeshed together, it makes it that much more harder, I guess, for people to be able to psychologically switch off. So, and like you mentioned, there's this culture where because it's remote, perhaps higher ups don't trust that their employees are doing their work, and they think it's okay to spam their employees with emails and texts and calls at all hours of the day, because for them it's like, hey, you're just at home and your laptop is right there. Like, what does it take you like 2 minutes to respond to my demands, right?
Right.
So, do you have any tips perhaps in creating a clear delineation between work and home? And if you have someone who's sort of a higher up who is, sort of crossing over the boundaries between work hours, how would you recommend for the audience to handle that?
Well, there's a ton of stuff out there online about, how do you set up a proper space at home for work. So I don't want to go into that, because for me, at the end of the day, it is about how do we have the right conversations? How do we keep the communication channels open? Whether as the employee, right, you're going to always have very difficult circumstances, but most people feel they are powerless. They don't know how to negotiate with the boss to ask them what the boss needs. And we actually have to teach them. How do you do that? Because, for example, if you simply ask someone, you're not likely to get someone to basically just agree, because they're seeing as just kind of giving in to you.
Correct.
There's a whole strategy and approach to how do I start a conversation with my boss so that I can help my boss both understand what I need, but also first understand what the boss's needs are, and how do I package what I need so that it will still help meet the boss's end objective. And we do a lot of simulations and sessions to teach people, how do I start to have that conversation so that I don't feel disempowered and I just kind of stew in silent frustration. But the bosses as well need to also then learn first, how do I spot the signs and symptoms? But then how do I even bring it up? For example, one of the biggest problems is I might have a boss who is, I understand the importance of mental health, right? Okay, so I'm supposed to have the Zoom session from 5 to 6. Oh, this meeting ended at 5:45. I've got 15 minutes. Let me just check in on my team members, right? Hey, how are you doing, Shavina? I'm okay. Well, now that you brought it up, I wanted to tell you about this. Hey, look, I've got to run off for my next meeting. Let's put a pin on this and come back to it, right? You are not likely to get your employee to bring it up again, because while you're well-intentioned, you've kind of like dismissed the seriousness of your employee. So team leaders and managers need to be trained. Am I in the right frame of mind? Is this the right time? How do I bring it up? And how do I not succumb to the temptation to try to fix things, right? A lot of times when you bring up a problem, the boss just wants to say, okay, what's your problem? What do you need? Like, do you need this? Let me fix it for you. That is not how mental health works, right? You have to start by first demonstrating that you listen, that you can reflect, right? And so again, these are things that we also need to train bosses and managers. How do I engage with my employees the right way? And we need to train the employees then, how do I bring it up with my bosses the right way? That communication technique is far more important than whether you have a proper desk or you're using the dining table.
I think what I'm hearing for you is more of psychological first aid. So higher ups do have to be trained on, let's say, aspects of emotional intelligence, and it's not more of like leadership aspects, because sometimes people, when they think of, oh, I need to lead a team, it's very tyrannical and dictatorial in nature as opposed to being an effective leader, right? So when you think of the word leader, you'd want to be able to look up to someone and not just follow the person because they're in a position of authority. So is there perhaps any other psychological first aid tips that you could share with the audience, just for them to preserve their mental well-being further?
Well, a couple of things, right? First, it is starting with the view of vulnerability, meaning as leaders, how can I share that I am going through these stressful moments myself, right? Sometimes as a boss, I might come across as kind of cold and snappy. But if I'm willing to share, look, the reason why I'm this is because my board is on my case. I've got these deadlines to meet. I don't know how we're going to, meet our financial obligations. And that's what's keeping them up at night. Just the act of sharing, even if your employees can't do anything about it, they start to connect with you as a human first, rather than just as that very difficult and demanding boss, number one. The second part, again, to come back to that whole oxytocin model, is a lot of progressive organizations are now thinking about proper structured support systems, peer support groups, mentors, right? Within the organization or within the broader industry. So encouraging employees to kind of join part of organizations. For example, in Malaysia, with women executives, right? Organizations like Lean In make a big difference. Startup entrepreneurs are an extremely stressed, anxious, and depressed bunch. And that's why a lot of organizations are out there to support founders. And so by encouraging people to reach out and connect to use these support systems, they feel like, oh, I've got other peers who are going through what I go through. I have a place where I can safely open up without being judged, without kind of being, seen as being weak, right? And so organizations that encourage the employees to join these support organizations are, I think, going to thrive in these difficult circumstances.
Mhm. And I think it's great that you mentioned about oxytocin, because I wanted to bring that up. As human beings, we feel this innate need to feel a sense of physical connection and a sense of belonging, right? So now that the pandemic has completely wiped that out, and for new employees transitioning into the workplace, that element of really delving into the workplace culture is out of the equation.
Yeah.
So, and social distancing, right? Our rational brain understands that. But the physical inability to be near and hold and touch our loved ones sends a very confusing message that the distance could possibly be a rejection.
Yes.
And you mentioned cognitive load. So this is like a whole bunch of things that's going on in your mind at the moment.
Yeah.
And having to deal with these conflicting messages can be very, very exhausting. So I think you mentioned that in order to build team cohesion and a sense of belonging at the workplace, we should have perhaps like a virtual check-ins or meetups. But how effective exactly are they, and not something that just further adds to the strain of the employee, because it's another meeting, it's another screen you have to look at, and
Sure.
yeah.
Again, which is why I think the first thing is time bounding meetings, right? So I'm a believer in 15-minute meetings, but sometimes maybe 30, but not meetings that go on beyond an hour, right? So creating a time bound and starting the meeting, for example, by just saying, hey guys, one word, how's everyone doing today, right? How are you doing physically? How are you doing mentally? How are you doing socially, right? So that we all kind of have a quick gauge from our employees. Then you can follow up with, one-on-one conversations later on if you do notice someone kind of feeling a bit out of place. But those small connections, I think, make a big difference rather than just having long drawn out meetings.
And I think that's where the whole Zoom fatigue comes from, because of the back-to-back meeting culture. So at the end of the day, you've had 5 meetings and you've done none of your work, right? And perhaps, like you mentioned, someone could be attending the meeting, but their video could be off and they could be multitasking and answering their emails. So it really isn't very effective or efficient at that point. Right. So I think it's a bit far-fetched to expect organizations to transform completely, because as we know, even individuals can't do that overnight.
Sure.
So what would some of your advice or tips be for management who has to handle their team remotely? How do you facilitate better team cohesion while not micromanaging them and giving them the autonomy to just do their work and completely trust them?
I don't want to monopolize this conversation, because I think I'd be at risk of repeating what I said, but I noticed Dr. Krishna has put up his hand, and perhaps we should invite him into the conversation and share his views and perspectives.
Yes, Azran. I just have a small question to ask you, a comment rather. The idea of compartmentalizing, doing things one at a time. It's a very good idea, because I see now in this age of emails and WhatsApp and social media and Facebook, maybe, people are always on their phones and their computers. You're doing your emails, suddenly you get a WhatsApp message, you go and answer the WhatsApp message, and then you do back your email, and then somebody answers the WhatsApp, and you keep on. There should be very little, you should be able to do things at your own pace. You do your emails, and then after that, maybe after your lunch, you see your WhatsApps, and then you do. There should be seldom a need where something needs to be answered now. Why is there a need for a question by somebody or a task to be done, and it has to be done now, as long as it is done during the day? So you should be able to put aside your phone and say, I'm going to do my emails. When I finish all my emails, then I'll check all my WhatsApps, and then I'll have my lunch, and then I'll watch my TV, maybe later in the day, especially when you have WhatsApp groups, you know, one person keeps talking, another talking, goes on and on. So you should be able to compartmentalize. Don't be a slave to your WhatsApp or your
That's
email.
right.
You
That's
control your own life, have time for yourself. And I think for mental health, another very good point is at the end of the day, when you've finished all your work, you must set aside some time to unwind before you go to sleep. Read, watch TV, whatever you want. Unwind, forget about your work or rotary or whatever it is. Unwind and then only go to sleep. Otherwise, your mind will still be working while you sleep. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. And with that, I'd love to also acknowledge Mahendran's point where he shared that writing is a great method to help declutter the mind, especially at the end of the day for us to make sense of what we've gone through. By the way, one of the things that I try to focus on with sleep, because my issue is I tend to wake up in the middle of the night, right? And I've got all these anxious thoughts. And so what's helpful is I have a pen and paper on my bedside table. By writing down what's the pressing concern that I have, I'm giving my brain permission to go back to sleep. Because if you don't do that, the brain is actually, I'm going to forget it. I'm going to forget it. So I'm going to keep replaying it, and it's going to be hard to fall asleep. So that's why, like Mahendran says, you know, a pen and paper can be a great way to build positive mental health.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna, for raising that up. It sounds like you should be everyone's boss and then wouldn't be having any problems. So I suppose that we can move on to the Q&A session now. So I managed to pick up a question from the chat from Victor Fu. And He says, hi, Azran, a very insightful discourse indeed. Does the type of personality determine the adaptation of coping with stress? Thank you.
Yeah, so there's actually not a lot of science that backs that up, right? That whether certain personality tendencies, and most of the time people think about extroversion versus introversion, you know, kind of being analytical versus being kind of social and empathic. Whether does that mean you're more likely to be prone to kind of being triggered by stress or anxiety? And I don't think that there's meaningful data to say that one personality type has a higher propensity to experience, you know, kind of mental health issues. But I think what we have to probably be aware of is that everybody's experiencing this stress and pressure, but the right way we connect with someone, that is where we can make a difference by understanding, you know, their certain personal preferences, right? So someone who's introverted might prefer a quiet one-on-one setting, where someone who's extroverted might prefer a social group setting, right? But everybody is still experiencing stress, anxiety, and depression.
Thank you for that. So I've only managed to pick up one question from the chat box. Team, is there any questions that I seem to have missed out on? Or does anyone want to unmute themselves and just ask their questions directly to Azran?
Okay, Shavina, there's none on the FB at all. I guess we've also picked up everything else from the chat as well.
All right, so no one would like to pose a question to Azran. This is your time, like the best opportunity now.
We've hit the 1 hour mark, so everyone's like, okay, got to follow what Azran says. Do things in time bucket.
Right, so I don't think that we have anyone that would like to ask a question. So, oh, Dr. Krishna asks us in the chat, how do you know so many medical terms?
Well, so, you know, I have a fantastic and wonderful team. My co-founders include Dr. Jeremy Ting. He's a medical doctor by training. Dr. Tiffany Ong is a cognitive psychologist. Dr. Hariyati is a health psychologist. You know, so I'm privileged and blessed to surround myself with people much smarter than me. I'm just the good looks, and you know, that's all I bring to the table.
All All right. So if there aren't any further questions, perhaps Azran, if there's any final words or tips that you'd like to share with the audience before we move on to the poll aspect of the evening.
Well, one last thing, perhaps, if people want to share, is as part of the National Coalition for Mental Well-being, right? Besides what Dr. Dixon is doing with communications and social media and setting up a website, is also to have a 24/7 helpline manned by professional psychologists and counselors. And that number is available on the National Coalition of Mental Wellbeing website, which is ncmw.com.my. And that number is 8408-1748. It's available 24/7. So if you feel that you want to help someone who is struggling and they might need to speak to a proper human in the middle of the night, in the middle of the day, there are resources available at their disposal.
And to the audience, I would just like to add that the National Coalition for Mental Wellbeing is an initiative that we're looking to launch in the near future, very, very soon. And Naluri has been a strong backer throughout the entire process, and Azran and his team have been immensely helpful when it came to designing the website. So thank you so much for your involvement in our initiatives. So can we have the polls up, please? The very last poll for the evening. Right, so it's up, and basically it asks you if the session has provided you with a better understanding and toolkit in preserving your mental health whilst working from home. So your options are definitely, nah, and 50-50. Wow, a lot of the responses are saying definitely. Okay, that's a very high number. That's like 49 participants who responded definitely, and just one person who said 50-50. But it's okay. Like I said, there's two ends of the spectrum, and you can always be in the middle. No worries there. So yeah, do check out our chat. I believe some of my team are sharing the links to our social media, so you can head on over there if you would like to get more information. So Dr. Dixon, I will pass on the floor to you.
Okay, I forgotten to unmute myself. I'm too engrossed in listening to Ashran. Thank you very much. I would like to call upon, let me just quickly share my slide. Let me call upon Shavini to thank the speaker. Shavini?
Thank you, Dr. Dixon. Hi, everyone. I'm Shazvini, and on behalf of the National Coalition for Mental Wellbeing, I'd like to thank our esteemed speaker, Mr. Azran, for providing his valuable insight on this topic. I've personally written a lot of notes, and I realized I'm not a multitasker as I thought I was. I'm sure many of us have learned a lot, including myself. And I really want to thank the team as well for planning this webinar, as well as Shavina, because I think she did such a great job as a moderator. Lastly, thank you to our fellow participants as well for attending this, and looking forward to have you in our next webinar. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe. Back to you, Dr. Dixon.
Yeah. And thank you very much, Shavini, and thank you, Asran, for giving such a good talk. And this is the first webinar out of the 6 that we are on time and earlier.
Oh, hold on. We have a last-minute question from
Yes.
Victor Fu. Azran, would you mind taking it?
I am not qualified, Victor. I don't know enough to tell you whether the data says otherwise. My hypothesis is that married people have less stress than unmarried people. But maybe that might change after 7 years, so we'll see. Who knows? I don't know.
Okay, good. Yes. So now, what's next? After you have attended all the 6 webinars, I would like to actually introduce some of the helplines that you would like to get support from. We have James, Befrienders, Seham, MMHA, NCSM, and definitely Naruli is in here. All right. So take a picture of this screenshot. If you need any support, do call them, right, in related to any mental health. Now, to close off, all right, let's talk about our next third Thursday talk in June. So it's about lifestyle and MCO. And today, Shavini have done such a good moderator. Right? I think people just love the way she moderate together with Asran. And yet, I would like to introduce our next June moderator, which is Miss Yvonne Lim, right, to promote the upcoming Thursday talk. Yvonne Lim, pass to you.
Okay, thank you, Dixon, and thank you, Asran, for the wonderful talk. And I would love to hear from you again in near future. Okay, I believe all of you guys here heard the word YOLO before. It means you only live once, okay? But if you do it right, one is enough. So when is the last time we put down everything, our Zoom, like what Asran said, our email, and take a good look around you? What are the life that we are living right now?